Welcome to the European Forum for Urban Security's Secure for All podcast. Secure for All aims to empower local and regional authorities to ensure the security of soft targets and public spaces against potential threats. In each of these episodes, experts from our consortium join to explore a different aspect of making and keeping public spaces open, accessible and safe for everyone. In our last episode, we talked about ways of identifying and evaluating the problems in your public spaces. The next step then is working toward fixing those, and sometimes that requires changes in the built environment. But good physical security design is often much easier demanded than done, and it usually comes with quite a few challenges, and I'm very glad to welcome Paul van Sommeren and Kaya-Marleen Franke of the DSP Group to talk about those challenges with me today. But before we do that, let's briefly talk about the two of you and introduce you to our listeners.
Yeah, my name is Paul van Sommeren. I'm an urban planner by training and social geographer. I worked for a while at the Ministry of Justice and Security in the Netherlands and then founded DSP Group. That was somewhere in the 80s, I guess. So that is a research and consultancy bureau based in Amsterdam. We are now about 40 people. We work mainly for non-profit organizations, the government, mostly ministries, big cities, but also the railroad companies, for example, and the European Commission. And we do quite a lot of work for European institutes at this moment.
Yes, and my name is Kaya-Marleen Franke. I have a background in social psychology, specifically psychology of conflict, risk, and safety. Yeah, I started out working for DSP a few months ago, first as an intern and now as a junior researcher. And I mainly work for DSP on two EU-funded crime prevention projects, the Cutting Crime Impact project and the Efus-led Secure for All project, in which I am responsible to develop guidelines and implement a training program about urban planning, design, and management for urban security, or in short, UPDM US.
Great. So what got you interested in Secure for All in the first place?
We already worked on the Cutting Crime Impact project, and I thought the Secure for All project was interesting because it was solely focusing on the public domain, the public spaces in urban environments. And the focus in a lot of European institutes was very much on terrorism only. Terrorism in the public space. But terrorism is a very small risk. It is something which is very serious, but it doesn't happen that often. And I like to broaden the theme to also talk about other types of violence, like, for example, sexual harassment, theft, pickpocketing, and also feelings of insecurity in the public domain. So not only terrorism, but the whole array of crime problems, you might say, security problems in the public domain in cities in Europe.
And against this backdrop, then, what are your hopes and expectations for the project?
Well, I, of course, hope that we can equip all of those who have a stake in decisions and challenges regarding public safety, for instance, local and regional authorities, law enforcement agencies, but citizens and community members themselves, by carrying out this training program in which we share knowledge, expertise, best practice to better prepare and equip them on how to incorporate security by design principles into the planning, design, and management of urban space. But I personally also wish that from this training program that people realize and take home the message that the mere act of coming together and discussing, exchanging views and expertise from these various disciplines is something that is very important in a world that faces challenges that are becoming so complex that we cannot solve them on our own anymore. And of course, on top of that, I also hope that we can design our training in a way that makes this collaboration fun and engaging.
So in security design, there's a design aspect and there's a security aspect. And before we talk about the design, what is that security that you are designing for in the first place?
That's a serious one. That's probably the most difficult. So I always make the distinction between objective and subjective security. Objective is what is really happening to you in the public domain. You might be blown up by a terrorist, or you might be pickpocketed, or you might be harassed at night in the urban area, or your car is stolen, or you're in the Netherlands a serious problem. Your bike is stolen. That's objective. It happens. You can see it. There is blood on the floor or glass on the floor. But on the other hand, you have the feelings of insecurity. And the strange thing is that a lot of people, in some instances, feel insecure. A really intriguing question is how these two relate. Because you cannot say that objective security causes always the same amount of subjective security. Because sometimes people feel extremely secure when there are a lot of people around them, in a central station, for example. But if you look at the hotspot map of pickpocketing or harassment, the biggest problem is in those places. And the same goes for terrorism. The terrorists always look for famous and crowded places, for example. So you can feel very, very secure at a certain place, while in reality it is very, very insecure. There's a lot of crime. And the other way around. And that's intriguing. And that is important also for urban planners, for designers, but also for police people to understand these differences. So, yeah, thanks for the question. That's a good one.
I totally agree with Paul. I think for me, security is also a very difficult term to define, especially because the subjective feeling of security as experienced by the person may divert from, as Paul said, from the objective reality of security, but also more importantly, the psychological reactions people feel to risks or threats in their physical environment can also differ between people. It's a tricky one. So for one person, a specific urban space might feel safe, while for another one, it does not. And people fear for various reasons. And this is pretty much influenced by space, time, and the people themselves. So your own psychological predispositions, one might be more fearful than the other one, but also the people around you. So yeah, that's the difficulty. How can we design space that actually is, but also feels safe for all people if the meaning and the perception of security can very much, vary depending on where, when, and who you ask.
Before we drill down on that contrast between subjective and objective security, I'd like to throw a related concept in the mix first. That of soft targets in public spaces. What does that mean to an urban planner, and how does it feature in your work?
The expression comes from an action plan of the EU. The reference is often made to places where there are a lot of people and that are quite easy to attack. So the focus was in that action plan very much on terrorism. So then you end up with the places like the Boulevard the Ramblas or the Boulevard des Anglais in Nice, and a ram raiding truck or car killing a lot of people. If you broaden the idea of soft targets, you may actually say it is all people who use public space or who do want to use the public space, because that's also an important one. A lot of people, for example, at night, they don't dare to go to the public space. And this is one of the main issues. If a space has to be public, then everyone must be able to go there. So you cannot close public space in that respect. So a soft target, I would say, is people at public spaces, and these spaces should always be public.
Let's focus on these psychologically closed spaces of fear for a moment here. An example that I found in the literature a couple of years ago was a train station, and it is subjectively so insecure that nobody dares to go there. But because nobody dares to go there, there is no crime taking place because there is nobody to be victimized. And as a consequence, the place is objectively secure because no crime happens there. But in the end, nobody has gained anything because nobody's willing or able to use the space. What do you do with that?
So if there is in reality a very, very dangerous place because there are a lot of criminals there, pickpocketing or stealing or attacking people, and the place looks very insecure, actually that is a very good thing. So if, as a kind of naive urban planner, you change it and you bring in more light, more sightlines, you make it cleaner, then you attract people to a place, but in reality it is very, very insecure. Then you're doing something dangerous, actually, as an urban planner. So you should always look at the difference between objective and subjective security and what do you do with it? So if the problem is objective security, you have to face that and to do something about it, which cannot be done, by the way, by urban planners. This is often also a problem for the police. So that's why we talk a lot about a multi-agency approach. It is not only about light and sightlines, it is also about clean environment, repairing, maintenance. It is about social cohesion. So you always have to involve a lot of people there.
So when you interact with people, how much of that work, how much of those conversations is expectation management?
Well, have you ever felt a lot of feelings of insecurity in Disneyland, for example? So you can design in security that a space feels more secure. That's not that difficult. But you have to think about what problem do we want to solve? And is it fear? Is it feelings of insecurity? Or is it real crimes? Oh, well, there we go again.
Yeah, so I always say, well, before we get to the actual design process, we first need to understand the underlying psychological mechanisms that actually induce these undesired feelings or fear of crime in specific urban environments. And yeah, in my research, I was investigating how urban green spaces can influence your perceptions of security or feelings of insecurity. And I was mainly touching upon 3 different criminological theories. For instance, the prospect refuge theory, where prospect, refuge, and escape are among the primary predictors of danger. So we especially like places that provide prospects of an open view, where we can easily escape from a threat, but also where we can take refuge. However, this last one, refuge, is tricky, as places that provide refuge or a place to hide are also preferred by those who commit crimes. So we need to be careful with designing space that provides too much refuge. Then there's another theory, the routine activity theory, which argues that for a crime to happen, there must be a motivated offender, a suitable target, and a lack of a guardianship or an opportunity. So this directs us towards promoting routine activities by altering the physical appearance of a place. So if a place invites to spend more time outdoors, this can lead, for example, to increased natural surveillance through my eyes on the street, which then reduces the likelihood of crime to occur. Or to put it differently, it increases the likelihood to witness crimes, which then deters potential offenders, but also induces a feeling of security in possible victims. And then the last one I would like to mention is the broken window theory, which directs interventions toward focusing on the physical appearance rather than the removing social dynamics. And according to this theory, we need to remove or replace characteristics of the built environment which might signal physical disorder, because a place that seems like it is not being cared for and lacks social control suggests to criminals that they are better off committing vandalism and crime. So these are just a few examples of theories which guides these accepted approaches for using better design strategies.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the theoretical foundations and the mindset that you bring to these tasks. Now, if you have to translate that into practice, what is the process, the actual process of planning for security? Where do you start? What do you do?
Essentially, it's working together with different disciplines. And you have to make a distinction there between new to build urban environments, so there's nothing there, or it is existing. That's an important difference. But I'm an urban planner myself, and urban planners, architects, designers, they are very optimistic. If you look at the brochures, it is always sunny. People are always smiling. The development they are drawing is always big fun, essentially. And that's how an urban planner, an urban designer, an architect, he or she has to do it that way. Otherwise, well, it is a kind of a depressive profession, you might say. On the other hand, if you involve people from other disciplines, like the police, you have a different angle to it. And they can say to the designer, okay, but, well, let's assume it's raining, or let's assume it is very dark, or let's assume there is a ram-raiding maniac terrorist that approaches this urban space. How could you solve that problem? So it is mixing the optimistic view of planners and architects and designers with a more realistic approach. Okay, there's also crime happening, and sometimes it is completely silent, it is dark, it is raining, and there's only a small group of men standing there, and you see they have a knife in their hand. So that's also an option. Think about that. But then in the end, it is always about a democratic process of planning, of making a new environment or redesigning an existing environment. And I think it should never be the security industry, the police, who is in charge there, because then the designs would be horrible. It should be kind of a public, open, optimistic space, but you should reckon with the dark side of the world, so to speak.
Yeah, you come together with multiple stakeholders and you try to define or identify and prioritize what is actually at stake, what's the problem. And then you try to pinpoint root causes of the problem together. You try to come up with a response with an action plan, and then, implement that action plan, and then you assess, evaluate, and it's like a never-ending cycle. So after evaluating, assessing, you'll see if anything changed, anything happened, and then it starts from the beginning. But the most important is, as Paul said, to take this multi-stakeholder approach and try to seek as many different perspectives as possible.
When you say come together and evaluate later on, what does that mean? How do you measure the success of your designs, and what indicators can you use to do that?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, because normally if you want to evaluate a crime prevention project, you can simply use these academic models of randomized pre-post group approaches. It doesn't work this way in urban planning and design. That is a far too complicated process. So all you can do is afterwards have a check on, do people like the urban space? Is it used? Is it used in a way you want? And look at it also from a security perspective. Is it felt more safe? And is it objectively more safe? You can do studies on issues like violence. Is more or less violence happening at a place? But you can only do that after often several years. That's another problem with urban design and planning. These processes takes awfully long. So in the Netherlands, if you start planning, it takes another 5 to 10 years before something really is built there. And then you can see, okay, what is the outcome? So there is a long timeline in between the first design, the first ideas about the design, and the end result. It goes quicker when you have an existing environment and you only change the existing environment. To see the effects, you need long-term research, which is not very popular by politicians, by the way.
Okay, so the timescale seems to be a bit of a challenge there. Another thing that I'd be very interested in hearing more about is the physical scale. So what is your unit of analysis when you're designing? Is it the neighborhood? Is it the block? Is it the individual house? How far up and down on these scales do you go?
Well, I can give you a very short answer. You need all these scale levels, as we call it. I once made the metaphor of it is jumping from a plane and you have a parachute opening and then you go down. First, you have to see the whole city. Then you have to see the neighborhood level. Then you have to see the block level. And then you have to see the level of a house. So all these issues should be somehow included. There is a difference in perspective between designers and security industry people, you might say. The security people are always looking very focused on one street, one building, one boulevard, and how can we protect that in a kind of a physical way. Urban planners, designers, architects have a broader view. But both perspectives are important, of course. So it is all about a combination of these two.
And what about other perspectives that need to be in the mix? Let's take vulnerable groups, the homeless, for instance. Who speaks for them? Because they are part of our public spaces. And one lingering criticism of urban security design has been that it is designing out poverty just as much as it's about designing out crime. So how do you avoid that, and who represents the underrepresented in the planning process?
In the end, it is the local council or the neighborhood council or the national government. So that's the connection to existing democracy. Normally, in most countries, you have extremely complicated processes of participation, so all people can participate. But it is also about simple thinking. You talked about homeless people. So you can design out homeless people. That's not that difficult. You make spikes everywhere. It looked like shit. Let's be honest. So you can also say, okay, let's design places for homeless people somewhere else or include them. So we always have to think about the fact that urban design is in the end politics in concrete and bricks. Every political decision ends up with something which is really happening in society and which is really built or it is not built. These are political decisions in the end. That is why, back to the training, it is important to have people there who somehow connect to the local authorities, the responsible local authorities, which are often council members. It is not only planners, it is not only security, police, urban planners, designers, architects. It's also, and I think they are the most important group, it is about local politicians, neighborhood politicians. So that type of people, they have to decide on what city do we want and what type of security do we want to build in that city.
Yeah, I think you've done a great job of highlighting the complexities of the problem we're dealing with here and how you, as experts, approach them. But part of the Secure for All training is to empower local and regional authorities to do that same task. So how do you transfer those skills? How do you structure the training sessions? How do you approach the training process? And which elements do you pick and prioritize?
Yeah, we try to make it as simple and easily understood as possible. Yeah, we have a lot of lectures mostly providing theoretical input, also using best practice examples to exemplify what can or already has been done in this field. But then we use these applied or practical exercises in which we want participants to convert the theoretical knowledge into practical skills. And we try to use different tools, these different easily understood models that may help to visualize for the participants to grasp better the theory and put it into practical skills. So playing a bit with these different tools to make it fun and engaging.
So you are dealing by default with a diverse crowd for these trainings, different stakeholders, different departments of the city, some external partners. They all come with their different theories, they all come with their different experiences, with their different terminology. How hard is it to provide a common ground for them to then move forward in the training together?
I often compare it with a supermarket. What we can show people is the enormous supermarket of ideas. There are different parts in the supermarket. There's one on new to build a residential area. There's one on to renovate city centers. There's one on transport hubs, for example. So these are the different parts of the supermarket. And within these different parts, you have a lot of products. And the difficult thing is that if you want to make a meal, something to eat, you have to pick your own ingredients in the supermarket, so to speak. These are choices that you have to make depending on the environment which is there, depending on what you like, which is a political decision. We show them the different parts of the supermarket. We say you will be able to shop. In the end, what you pick from the supermarket, that's up to you. I like this metaphor, actually.
Yeah. And I also want to add that it can be, of course, that people pick different things from a supermarket, but they just realizing that there are these differences, that these exist, and there are multiple truths is also something that they hopefully gain them training, and that it's not inherently wrong to have these differences. These interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary collaborations, they can be very difficult, but I believe that we need to let conversation, but especially also confrontation happen. Not everyone needs to agree, but hopefully people may realize that other perspectives might also be right and that we can learn from one another.
Yeah, you're completely right. So the design, planning, architectural process is talking, negotiating, changing, learning. And, well, all we can say, there should be some security, salt and pepper in the whole thing too. That's important, and we show them where to put it sometimes, but in the end it is, well, people have to decide it themselves. Yeah.
So I guess very few people who listen to this are going to be surprised that urban security design is a hard thing to do if you want to do it well. Although you gave quite a few reasons for why it might be even harder than originally thought. But a fascinating takeaway from this conversation, and it sounds like also from the training sessions, is that maybe that's not a bad thing, and that embracing that kind of complexity, embracing that difficulty in finding good solutions together is just part of the deal. So rather than complaining about it, we just need to accept it as a requirement of good process.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you fix one problem, you created another problem. There's always a backlash to that. So it is, in the end, the difficult thing is, okay, what do we do here in this place with these participants? What might be the best solution for now? And we can see that, well, maybe in 10 years or 20 years, we might have been wrong even. Well, this is getting too depressive now.
A little bit, yeah. But it still works nicely as a closing statement. So let's just go with this and pride ourselves on the clear-eyed realism with which we approach the world around us.
Yeah.
Kaya and Paul, you already sent me plenty of materials for the listeners who want to learn more about today's topic and your work. So all that's left to do really is to thank the two of you so much for joining me today and for your time and for this conversation. I'm really glad that we got to do this.
Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much for joining us. For additional information on our partners' work and the Secu4All project, please follow the links in the description. Secu4All is funded by the European Union's Internal Security Fund and coordinated by Efus, the European Forum for Urban Security. You can find us online at efus.eu or on Twitter under @EfusNews, that's @EFUSNEWS. This episode was produced and recorded by me, Lauren Schätzle, for the German European Forum for Urban Security, with the kind support of the Secu4All project team at Efus.